Hey, good morning, everyone in Business Law 2. I thought I'd put up a little review or some of my thoughts on Chapter 21, the essentials of negotiability. I have put up a couple YouTube videos from other instructors in the area that are much more entertaining and organized in their thought process than I am. One of them is actually a very corny song of negotiability. I think they have it down as 8 essential, but it's usually 7 essential requirements for negotiability. And again, this doesn't mean that some kind of contract or agreement between party A and party B isn't enforceable if it doesn't meet these 7 requirements. It's that upon further transfer, could the transfer of the instrument give the recipient greater rights? That's what we're concerned with. That's all what negotiability is about, why we're studying it. And sometimes it doesn't come about in terms of understanding or gelling in one's mind until you complete Chapter 20 through 25 before it all comes together. So if the promise between party A and party B doesn't meet one of these essential qualities, for example, it's not in writing, it's an oral promise. Could an oral promise be potentially enforceable between party A and party B? Sure. Could it even be potentially enforceable if party B assigns that contractual right to party C? Yes. All we're concerned with here, though, is does it meet the special standard of negotiability? Because party C, if it was transferred to them via negotiation, they might develop a status known as holder in due course status, and they might be able to enforce performance upon that promise and not have certain defenses raised against them that could have been raised in any other contractual obligation. That's the magic of it. That's the magic of commercial paper, negotiable instruments. Why it almost has a cash-like quality to it is because the defensibility of enforcement is lost in negotiable instrument, and that gives the recipient much more faith in their ability to potentially collect upon it. So anyways, Chapter 21, fairly straightforward. It's going to get a lot more meaningful, I think, after you complete all Chapter 20 through 25 and it all kind of gels together. I know it was like that for me in law school because I took, I don't know why I did, because the stuff, it's a little dry, right? It's a little boring. But I don't know, maybe because it fit my class schedule in my second and third year at law school. I took a lot of classes on the UCC Section 3 negotiable instruments. I think back then we called it commercial paper. And to me, it was like sometimes I'm like, all right, I get it, but why do I get it? And why is this meaningful? Eventually, it will gel together and you'll understand the concepts a little better. And I promise you, after Chapter 25, we're going to go into different segments of business law too. And I think some of you are going to like it a lot more. Some of you might love this. Fantastic. But I'm kind of preaching to those that find this stuff a little bit dry and a little bit less than palpable, like you're reading it and you're like, I just read something and didn't sink in at all. That sometimes is what commercial paper feels like to students. I know that. I know it felt like that to me too at some point. So anyways, the requirement, all of these things must be met in order for it to be negotiable and therefore have this heightened value in the sense of transferability and enforceability later on. First, it must be in writing and signed by the party executing it. A writing doesn't have to have any special form. There's old cases back in the day where the writing was done on like a piece of cloth as opposed to paper, handwritten as opposed to typed. I was very naive when I first went to law school, thinking everything had to be on like legal paper. That's why legal paper existed, that 11.5 by 17 paper to have the formality of enforceability. And there was a long time I thought things needed to be notarized and witnessed and all that kind of stuff. No, the law is trying to make commercial activity in business transactions to be simple and enforceable, but yet have enough clarity so we know what the party's intent was to be bound and what they're bound to do. And so as long as it's in writing in some form, and the book is correct, it can be in pencil. I don't know who'd want that because it's so easily manipulated. It should be in writing. I prefer it to be typed, but it can be handwritten. But it has no otherwise special quality other than written. I prefer paper than, written out on, I don't know, tree bark or something. But get the common sense. It's got to be in writing. It has to be signed by the party executing. A lot of people call that the endorsement. That's a mistake. Endorsements when the next party ultimately wants to transfer to it a third party, that's the form of endorsement. The original creator of the instrument, they sign it to prove they want to be bound. That's called simply a signature. The next is it must contain either an order to pay or a promise to pay. You don't have to use those words, but those words are very helpful if you do use them for lack of avoiding ambiguities. You want to use those words. So for practical purposes, use those words. Third, the order or the promise must be unconditional. Now, some people think like, well, what do you mean conditional? Like, what if I said this? Like, yeah, I will promise to pay you $3,000 provided my client gives me that $5,000 fee he owes me next week. Well, now it's a conditional promise. It doesn't mean the promise isn't enforceable. It doesn't mean it's not a binding contract that that condition occurs. But what it means now is that written arrangement is flawed for purposes of negotiability. Still very valuable, potentially very enforceable, but third parties won't get in a heightened ability to pay for or to collect upon it based upon negotiability because it's conditional on some other event. And many contracts are conditional on things. And therefore, if they're conditional, they're what? Non-negotiable. Careful on this. Sometimes people write on documents, this is a non-negotiable instrument. That does not destroy negotiability. A lot of people think it does. It doesn't. So it's got to be unconditional. It's got to be for, we'll call it a some certain in a second. So unconditional, if it's conditional, oh, if I get the job or if I get my Christmas bonus. I remember watching not too long ago, Christmas Vacation with Chevy Chase, and he was buying a pool and everything with the expectation that he was getting a huge Christmas bonus to cover the cost of it. And just like that, when things fell through, that's why we don't want to create a heightened degree of enforceability on negotiable instruments if they had a conditional quality to them. It can't be conditional on anything, even like any reference to an outside potentiality, it can't be. The instrument must provide a fixed amount. Careful on that one. There can be a fixed amount, $5,000 plus interest. Well, the $5,000 is fixed and the interest is ascertainable as long as we know it's either a variable rate set against some kind of market force or it is a flat, APR or something like that. That does not destroy negotiability having an interest rate. It needs to be a document where someone can read it and ascertain the amount of money to be paid without ambivalence. That's really what it boils down to. The next element, it must be payable either on demand or a fixed or definite time. So we call that a site draft, for example. If it doesn't have a date when it's collectible, just you can present it at any time for payment. And the other one is this paid on or before April 1st. That's totally fine. Careful, what if I didn't date the underlying document itself? That does not destroy negotiability. People are always thinking, oh, you didn't date it, it's no good. It's not a problem. The problem is when can it be collected upon? That's when you need a date, or if there's no date, it's usually deemed a site draft, and that's okay. Meaning it's payable upon demand. It must be payable to order of a pay or to bearer. Bearer is equivalent to also saying cash or payable to bearer. Those things are equivalent, and order is simply to James Corman or to the order of James Corman. Now, that gives me the option to basically convey it through negotiation. It's called order paper. We went over that in chapter 20. And the next one is the payee, unless the instrument is payable to bearer. Oh, and the drawee must be designated with reasonable certainty. So if I'm the drawer, meaning I'm writing it up, I have to be able to identify me. And that's why I'm pre-printed checks. Actually show you that one. That's actually got all my stuff on it. The pre-printed check identifies me as the drawer, but guess who else it identifies? Bank of America as the drawee with very reasonable certainty. And that's fine. And then when I write in who it's payable to, provided it's not bearer paper, if it just says cash or bearer paper, then we don't care about identity because the holder is the identity of who we need to know. But if it's going to be made payable to an order of someone, we have to give enough information to be able to identify who they are. And again, the signature doesn't have to be in cursive. My kids are adults now, not all of them. Half of my kids are adults, and they occasionally have to write checks. The modern era, they do many more things through electronic transfer transactions than they do checks. But every so often, my son will write a check, and I'll be with him. I forgot what we recently bought, or I went with him to buy, and he had to write out a check, and he said, I can't sign my name. What do you mean you can't sign your name? And he goes, I don't know how to write cursive. And he's 20 years old. I was kind of surprised. I'm like, you never, he goes, they never really taught me that at school. He goes, well, it doesn't matter. I said, by signing your name, you're just simply showing your objective desire to be bound by whatever the terms of that instrument is. And so it could be printed. It could be a squiggle, and that's what my son did for some reason, a squiggle. I don't like that. In fact, in my contracts with people with what I consider poor penmanship, I like them to have the printed name next to it because some of the people, even including my own, not so great. We want to be able to identify that person is. But it can be a mark, it can be an X, it can be the company's name if you're a representative of a company. Anything to show who the person is to be bound. That's all. Signed writing, I'm looking at some of the things in here. Unconditional, fixed amount of money. The conditional one comes up. Oh, issue and delivery is a big one, which is related to the certainty. I don't know why that's why I think some have 8 and other than have a certain, and some have 7. Issue and delivery means it has to be drawn by the drawer, but it has to have the intent to be issued, which means basically executed and delivered. What if I had a check out here and I'm not sure I'm going to give it to somebody and they find it on my desk and they take it? That's not delivery. That's a form of theft. You have to have the intent to deliver. So, and that's the original one. Delivery means the intentional transfer of possession and control of something. So that comes up from time to time. And delivery of an incomplete instrument. This is big. If a negotiable instrument is only partial filled out and signed before delivery, the maker or drawer is liable for the blanks if filled in according to instructions. I've actually had a criminal case, although it doesn't apply, but I brought up the UCC in my criminal trial that my client was instructed to fill in the other aspects, and that's not necessarily illegal or unheard of in commercial transactions. And I remember the judge, it was a bench trial. I didn't have a jury because I thought the judge would know the rules a little bit better. And the judge, I submitted the law or references to the law, and I made a strong argument on it. And the case wasn't about whether it was negotiable or not. The case was whether or not my client intentionally committed a crime. And I tried to raise reasonable doubt. And we actually got a not guilty on that because we argued that they had the instructions to fill in certain amounts and things of that nature. And if the holder fills in the blanks contrary to authority, the maker or drawer is liable to the original payee only for the amount actually authorized. A holder in due course, however, that's what we're getting to later chapter, they may actually have superior rights to enforce even a fraudulent amount because they didn't know. That's what the whole premise of being a holder in due course is. I didn't know of any wrongdoing or any malfeasance or invalidity to the document itself. Therefore, they get heightened status, and that's the power of negotiation, being a holder in due course. Again, the instrument does not need to be dated. That fools a lot of people. It's always a good idea to date it for record and purposes like that. Post-dating usually doesn't have any, I'm going to date it in 3 weeks. Don't cash it until then, but they present it today. They actually have the power to do that. We'll get to that in a later chapter a little bit more. But the chapter's dry. It's a bit boring. The videos I put up from YouTube, I think, will hopefully help you. Do those end of chapter questions. I think it'll help you understand the material better. And again, I can't promise you this, but I know my own experience, and I think a lot of people are like me. When you read all of the sections related to commercial paper, I believe it's chapters 20 through 25, maybe 26 has one a little bit related to. No, it's just through chapter 25. Well, it's 6 chapters. After it's over, it's kind of like jello, like making jello. It looks wishy-washy, doesn't make any sense. But after everything kind of puts it together and it's put in the fridge for a while, it'll gel and you'll start to get understanding. And then when you're out in the business world, you may not always know these answers off the top of your head, but they'll gel over time. And when you get a little bit of this stuff going on, you'll start thinking, how am I liable as the drawer of a check or a promissory note? How might I be liable as the first recipient if I decide to negotiate it to a third party? And what if it's not a negotiable instrument? Could I still assign it? And what are the enforceability issues related to that? It's not always about having the answers. It's about being able to ask those important questions as you move forward. This is an introductory class, and I know it can be a bit daunting getting through these first 5 chapters. I've taught this quite a few times, especially in my earlier days at the Mount. And my students have always told me, oh man, thank God I lasted after those sections on commercial paper because they were so, they just didn't gel with me well. I didn't get it well. But I think you'll get it later on if you're not getting it now. And I do want you to be patient because the other material in the book and in business law too, I think is much more digestible, and I don't want to call it concrete, but maybe it is. Maybe it's just a little bit more tangible to real context that we're going to actually explore in life and in businesses. Otherwise, be well. Don't be afraid to ask questions and reach out. I'm trying to keep it short. Still in 50 minutes. I thought I'd do it in 5. Apologies.